The floorboards bit cold against Clara's cheek. She had fallen hard, the jolt still rattling through her bones, ribs aching like shards grinding under her skin. The cabin smelled of whiskey, sweat, and wood smoke that had gone stale. Outside, the wind combed through the pines, but in here it was Jeremiah's breathing that filled the silence. Her brother's boots creaked the porch boards, each step deliberate, heavy, like a man working himself into a fury. Clara didn't move. She had learned the art of stillness, of becoming small, a shadow, a thing not worth noticing, because with Jeremiah, every movement carried a cost. Her chest rose and fell shallowly. Each breath was like swallowing broken glass. She whispered into the dust, words meant for no one. "My ribs are already broken." The phrase slipped from her lips like a prayer, or maybe a resignation. The door groaned open. Jeremiah's figure filled the doorway, a black cutout against the pale afternoon light. His face was set, the pale blue of his eyes clouded with drink and something meaner than drink. He had once been her protector, back when they were children, back when their father's hard hand fell equally on both of them and their mothers. Gentle laugh was still alive in the house. That boy was gone. In his place stood this man who drank to forget, and remembered too much when the bottle was dry. Get up. His voice was quiet, and quiet was always worse than shouting. Clara pressed, her palms against the splintered boards trying to rise. Pain tore through her side like fire, forcing her back down. She gasped, teeth gritted, tears threatening but never falling. I said, "Get up." The boot came, not enough to kill, but enough to make her slide across the floor until her back met the wall. Jeremiah's shadow loomed, long and jagged across the boards. He circled her, slow as a predator pacing its kill. "Think you're better than this place? Better than me? Always had too much of Ma in you. Too soft, too hopeful." He spat the word like it was filth. Clara turned her face away, staring at the light falling through the single window. Dust motes spun lazily in the shaft, indifferent to violence, indifferent to everything. She felt something inside her chest snap, not bone, but something more fragile. Some last tether of belief that if she just endured, just waited, Jeremiah might soften again. That hope died quiet on the cabin floor. When he finally left her crumpled in the corner, the silence was its own cruelty. His boots stomped into the back room, the thud of a bottle pulled from a shelf, and then the long drag of whiskey swallowed down. Clara closed her eyes. She didn't pray. She hadn't prayed in years. But she whispered again, "My ribs are already broken." This time the words felt less like surrender, and more like the smallest seed of something else. A seed she didn't dare name yet. Night came on. Jeremiah's snores rose thick and guttural from the other room, whiskey dragging him into heavy sleep. Clara stayed where she was, pressed against the wall, too bruised to move, but not too broken to think. She counted the beats of his snoring, listening for that deeper rhythm that meant he would not wake easily. Her ribs throbbed with every shallow breath, but beneath the pain was a sharper thing, resolve. She eased herself forward, careful to place her bare feet on the floorboard she knew would not creak. She had mapped the cabin by sound, by necessity, over endless nights of trying not to disturb the monster Jeremiah had become. The door stood a few steps away. She had looked at it 1,000 times, imagining freedom beyond it, but never with her hand on the latch. Now she reached out, fingers trembling as they closed around the cold iron. Jeremiah groaned once in his sleep. Clara froze, heart slamming against her broken ribs. Then his breathing deepened again. She lifted the latch. The night air hit her face like a slap, cold, sharp, alive. For the first time in years, the sky stretched wide above her, limitless and terrifying. Clara staggered onto the porch, legs quivering, lungs burning at the taste of freedom. She dared one glance back at the cabin. From out here it looked smaller, meaner, like a wound carved into the land. She turned away. The dirt road lay pale in the moonlight, winding away into stands of pine and scrub oak. She had walked it before, but only to fetch water or gather kindling. Never beyond the bend, never toward a world larger than Jeremiah's shadow. Each step was agony, but she took it anyway, her body screaming, her spirit clinging to the fragile thought that maybe, just maybe, she could outwalk his cruelty. Her bare feet bled against the stones. Her breath hitched with every jolt of her ribs. Still she walked, because behind her was Jeremiah, and ahead, though she could not see it yet, lay something else. By dawn, Clara's strength was near gone. The sun rose gold over the hills, painting the road in long shadows. Her legs buckled, sending her to her knees. The dust clung to her torn dress, her palms scraped raw against gravel. She dragged herself a few more feet, but her body rebelled. She collapsed beside a half-buried boulder, the warmth of it against her back the only comfort left. Clara tilted her head skyward, blinking against the light. She thought of her mother's voice, soft as spring rain, whispering bedtime stories, about places where people were kind, where the world was more than pain and whiskey and fists. Clara had never seen such a place. She doubted she ever would. Still, she whispered, barely louder than the wind. My ribs are already broken, but I'm still breathing, and with that, the world went dim. The hoofbeats came before the voice. At first, Clara thought it was her own heart, slamming inside her chest as she drifted in and out of consciousness. But the sound grew clearer, measured, steady, too regular to be anything but a horse. At full gallop. Panic jolted through her veins. Jeremiah. He had woken, discovered her absence, and was already hunting her down like wounded game. She tried to push herself up, but her arms buckled. Her ribs screamed. Her breath came in shallow gasps. All she could do was claw at the dust, dragging her battered body toward the scrub pine a few feet away. If she could make herself small, make herself vanish into shadow, maybe he would pass her by. The hoofbeats slowed, gravel crunched. Then a man's voice, low, steady, speaking not to her, but to the animal beneath him. Easy, Ranger. Easy now. Not Jeremiah. The sound of leather creaked as the rider dismounted. Clara squeezed. Her eyes shut, trying to will herself into nothingness. The boots came closer, careful on the dry earth. Miss? The word was gentle, cautious, as if he were speaking to a spooked mare ready to bolt. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Miss, are you hurt? Clara forced her eyes open. A face swam into focus above her, weathered by sun and wind, lines carved deep around dark, watchful eyes. He crouched several feet away, far enough not to threaten, close enough that she could smell horse sweat and leather and something else. Soap. Clean. I'm not going to hurt you, he said quietly. Not my way. Clara wanted to laugh. Bitter and broken. That's what men always said. And hurt came anyway. But there was something in his voice that didn't carry sharpness, something that steadied instead of cut. She heard herself rasp words she hadn't meant to say. My ribs are already broken. The man's face shifted, the way clouds shift over deep water. No pity, just a hard, simple recognition of truth. He didn't lunge forward, didn't crowd. Her. He sat back on his heels and nodded. I can see that. Time bent strangely for Clara after that. One moment she was half-conscious in the dust. The next she was aware of the man speaking again, his tone calm and steady. How long you been walking? She tried to answer, but the hours were a blur. Since dawn, she whispered, though it felt like forever. The man's gaze swept over her, the torn dress, the sunburned shoulders, the bloodied feet. He was older than she first thought, 35, maybe 40. His vest was worn soft with years of use, his shirt sun-faded but clean. He looked like a man who worked hard, lived rough, but had not surrendered to meanness. "My name's Thomas Garrett," he said finally. "You don't have to tell me yours if you'd rather not." Her throat worked. The smallest pause, then, "Clara." The name felt strange, like she was introducing herself to the world for the first time. "Clara," he repeated it, careful, as though testing the shape of it. "That's a good name." She shook her head weakly. "Not strong, not anymore." His eyes softened, but his voice stayed steady. "I think you're stronger than you know. You're out here on your feet when most folks would have given up miles back." Clara turned her face away, unwilling to believe. She was nothing but a cracked shell, a broken rib cage barely holding breath. Thomas didn't press. He just waited, patient as stone. "Someone did this to you," he said at last, and it wasn't a question. Clara's breath caught. A shiver trembled through her. She wanted to deny it, to swallow it down the way she always had. But the truth clawed its way out in a sound between a sob and a whisper. "Yes." Thomas's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped beneath his weathered cheek, but his voice stayed level. "They coming after you?" She tried to warn him. Jeremiah, the rage, the cruelty, the men he would bring. But the words tangled, stuck. All that emerged was a broken sound that might have meant yes. Thomas nodded, as though he understood anyway. He rose slowly, deliberate in every movement. "Then we best get you somewhere safe." The gelding, Ranger, stood a few paces off, patient, ears twitching, eyes calm. Clara had grown up around horses. She knew how they sensed cruelty. This one radiated gentleness. Thomas approached her again, moving like a man breaking a wild colt. "Going to lift you now," he said, his voice low and sure. "Won't hurt you more than you already are." Clara wanted to protest, to say she couldn't, that she'd collapse. But when his calloused hands slid beneath her, lifting her as if she were made of spun glass, she didn't fight. His arms were strong, steady, careful. The fire in her ribs flared, but she bit down on the sound that wanted to escape. "Easy now," Thomas murmured, and she realized he was speaking to her the same way he'd spoken to his horse, soft, coaxing, patient. He settled her onto the saddle, the leather sun-warmed beneath her. Then he swung up behind her in one fluid motion, arms loose around her, taking the reins without crowding her space. "Lean back if you need to," he said. "Won't think less of you." Clara stiffened, trying to hold herself upright, but the pain was relentless, a living thing gnawing inside her chest. At last, trembling, she let herself rest against him. His chest was solid, his breath even, his warmth steady as the ground beneath her. For the first time in years, she let go, just a fraction. The gelding stepped forward, smooth as water. Clara closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of hooves carry her away from Jeremiah's shadow. Somewhere, behind them, far off, she thought she heard a crow's call echo across the hills, a warning, or maybe a farewell. The cabin came into view, just as Clara thought she might slip into darkness for good. It rose quiet from a clearing, hewn logs weathered gray by wind and rain. Smoke curled from the chimney, thin and steady, a sign of life and warmth. Beside, it stretched a small garden, rows still neat despite autumn's fading season, and a well with a bucket waiting. To Clara's eyes, it looked like something from a dream, too solid, too good to be real. "It's not much," Thomas said, as Ranger slowed. His tone was almost apologetic. "But it's safe. Safe." That word rattled around in her chest, strange and foreign. She had long ago stopped believing such places existed. Thomas dismounted first, then turned, hands visible, careful. "Let's get you down." Clara shook her head faintly. I can't." Yes, you can. Not alone, but with me. His voice carried no judgment, just steady assurance. He lifted her again, arms gentle but sure, lowering her to the ground as though she might shatter. Pain roared through her ribs, but she swallowed it, clinging to his sleeve until her bare feet touched earth. The cabin door yawned open, spilling warm yellow light into the dusk. Clara swayed, exhaustion pulling at her bones. Thomas guided her. Inside, the interior smelled of pine smoke and something earthy, herbs drying on a shelf, leather, wool. A stone fireplace glowed with steady coals. Wooden shelves lined one wall, filled with more books than Clara had ever seen in her life. A table and 2 chairs sat near the window. The space was simple but alive, as if every corner had been tended, with quiet care. Thomas eased her onto a sturdy bed tucked against the far wall. The blankets were soft wool, not burlap or patched rags. Clara sank into them, disbelief tightening her throat. "You'll rest here," Thomas said. "I'll fetch water." He moved easily about the cabin, the rhythm of a man used to solitude, his steps confident but unhurried. When he returned, he held a tin cup, cool water sloshing gently inside. Clara's hands shook so badly she couldn't lift it. Without a word, Thomas knelt, holding the rim to her lips. The water slid down her throat like salvation. "Slow," he cautioned softly. "Too much at once will turn your stomach." Clara obeyed. When the cup was empty, she whispered, "Thank you." Thomas only nodded, setting the tin aside. "You'll need more than water soon. I'll make stew." Clara wanted to protest, wanted to say she didn't deserve such effort, that she'd only bring trouble through his door. But the words stuck. Her ribs throbbed. Her eyes drifted shut. She woke to the scent of rabbit and herbs simmering over the fire. A wool blanket lay across her shoulders. For a moment, panic surged. Jeremiah, she thought. But then the low scrape of a spoon in a pot, and Thomas's steady presence anchored her. "You're awake," he said without turning. No fanfare, no crowding. Just acknowledgement. "How long?" Her voice rasped. 2 days. Fever broke last night. 2 days. She blinked at the thought. Time lost to dark dreams and the cool touch of a cloth against her forehead. She remembered shadows moving, a voice reading from a book when nightmares clawed too close. Thomas set a bowl on the small table and pulled a chair close. "Rabbit stew," he said simply. "It'll help." When Clara hesitated, he didn't push. "You want to sit up? Might be easier." Her throat tightened at the question. When was the last time anyone had asked what might be easier for her? Carefully, Thomas propped pillows behind her, his hands gentle, movements practiced. Then he handed her the spoon. The first mouthful nearly undid her. Rich broth, tender meat, vegetables softened by long cooking, food made not to punish hunger, but to nourish. Her hands trembled. Thomas pretended not to notice. "Slow," he reminded, the corner of his mouth lifting. "There's more when you're ready. No one's taking it away." Clara forced herself to eat slowly, though every part of her wanted to devour the bowl. Tears pricked her eyes, but she kept them hidden. Afterward, she lay back, exhaustion pulling her under again. But before she drifted, a question slipped out. "Why?" Thomas looked up from the fire where he was tending coals. "Why what?" "Why? Help me. You don't know me. Don't know what I've done, what trouble I might bring." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice carried weight. "Had a sister once. Sarah. Married young. Her husband. Seemed decent enough. Brought flowers, minded his manners, but after the wedding, it changed. We all saw the bruises, heard excuses that didn't add up, and when she stopped visiting, stopped answering letters." His jaw clenched, eyes shadowed. Found her in the barn one spring. He said the horse spooked, but I knew better. Nobody wanted to ask hard questions. Silence pressed thick. The crackle of fire filled the cabin. Thomas's voice was steady but rough with old grief. So now, when I see someone hurt the way you're hurt, I don't ask questions. I just help, because maybe this time I can make a difference. Clara's eyes burned. No one had ever spoken like that to her. No one had ever looked past the bruises without blame. I didn't do anything, she whispered, ashamed at the confession. I know, Thomas said simply. And in his voice, she heard no doubt. For the first time in years, Clara felt something fragile stir beneath her broken ribs. Not peace, not yet, but something close to it. Morning came with silence too heavy to trust. The forest beyond the cabin stood still, as though holding its breath. Clara stirred under the wool blanket, her ribs aching but dulled now to a constant throb instead of fire. She blinked at the sunlight streaming through clean windows, almost suspicious of its warmth. For years, mornings had meant fear. Jeremiah's boots thudding on the floorboards, his voice sharp, the weight of his shadow filling every room. But here, there was only the pop of the fire and the sound of Thomas moving about with quiet efficiency. You slept through breakfast, he said from the table, where he was whittling a strip of pine into something shapely and neat. His tone was matter-of-fact, no accusation, just observation. Clara shifted, grimacing. Didn't mean to. You needed it. Healing takes more than bone. Takes rest, too. He glanced at her, then returned to his carving. There's bread, and stew if you're ready. Clara looked down at her hands, pale against the blanket. She had never been given permission to rest. Even in sickness, Jeremiah had demanded chores, demanded service. Her chest tightened, not with pain, but with the strange, disorienting weight of being cared for. The days settled into a rhythm. Thomas tended his traps, split wood, repaired fences, always with steady, deliberate movements. Clara watched from the window or the bed, her body too weak for much else. In the evenings, he read aloud by lamplight. Not sermons, not ledgers, but poetry. Whitman mostly, lines about roads and freedom and voices of the open plains. Clara listened. Sometimes, following the words with her eyes, stumbling over letters she half knew. One night the truth slipped out. I can't read proper. Her voice was small, almost shameful. Thomas looked at her, surprise flickering only briefly before it softened into something else. Would you like to? The question hit her harder than any blow Jeremiah had ever given. Want. No one had asked her what she wanted in years. Yes, she whispered. I'd like that. So they began. Slowly, with simple words, Thomas guiding her finger along the page, steady, patient, never, laughing when she stumbled. Each syllable wrestled free was like reclaiming something Jeremiah had tried to strip from her, the right to learn, to know, to have something that was hers alone. As she gained strength, Clara moved about the cabin more. She swept floors, tended. The fire insisted on small tasks. Thomas didn't stop her, but he watched carefully, making sure she didn't push too far. It was during one of those evenings, the lamplight golden and the book open between them, that her voice cracked open. He wasn't always like that. Thomas said nothing, waiting. My brother, Clara continued, fingers tightening on the page. When Ma died, he used to tell me stories at night. Stories he made up, about brave girls who outwitted wolves and found treasure. He tried to step into Pa's place, I think. But he was only 19. Scared. Angry. He started drinking. And then, she swallowed hard. The first time he hit me was 6 months after Pa's funeral. I burned supper. He apologized for weeks after. Promised it was just once. Her hand went to her lip, remembering. But it wasn't once. Months would pass, and then it came again. Harder. Then more often. Until I stopped counting. Thomas's jaw worked, but he kept his voice level. "And you stayed. He was all I had left," Clara said, shame thick. "I thought, if I could just be better, quieter, more useful, maybe it would stop. Maybe he'd be the brother I remembered." Her eyes lifted, desperate, almost daring Thomas to call her a coward. Instead, his voice was firm. "You're no coward. You survived. That's no small thing." Her breath hitched, a sob threatening. "You don't know." "I do," he interrupted, and this time he rolled up his sleeve. A scar ran white and jagged from wrist to elbow, stark against his weathered skin. "My brother Caleb gave me this when I was 16. He'd lost our last horse in a card game. I tried to stop him tearing the house apart. He had a knife." Thomas's eyes were dark with memory. "I left 2 years later. Haven't looked back." Clara's gaze lingered on the scar. In it, she saw something she had never allowed herself. Recognition. Proof that others carried the same hurt, the same betrayals by blood. Later that night, when Thomas had banked the fire and silence filled the cabin, Clara lay awake. Her ribs ached, but it was nothing compared to the ache of memory pressing heavy on her chest. Jeremiah's words echoed, worthless, soft, nothing but trouble. But Thomas's voice pushed back, low and steady. "You survived. That's no small thing." For the first time, she wondered if the brokenness inside her was not the end of her story, but the beginning of something else. Outside, a night wind whispered through the trees. Far away, in town, men spoke of a stranger asking questions. A woman on foot, ribs broken, hair dark as midnight. Jeremiah's shadow stretched long across the frontier. And Clara, curled beneath a wool blanket in a cabin filled with books and firelight, didn't yet know how soon it would find her again. The first sign came with a question asked in town. Thomas had ridden down to Cedar Falls for supplies, leaving Clara behind with a promise, back before nightfall. She busied herself as best she could, sweeping the cabin, laying herbs to dry, practicing letters in the book Thomas had marked for her. Her ribs still ached with each bend, each breath, but there was something about tending the home that gave her a sense of belonging. When the door finally creaked open, she looked up eagerly, half-smile ready. But Thomas's face was harder than she'd ever seen, jaw tight, eyes scanning the trees before he even stepped inside. "What is it?" she asked, the words catching in her throat. He set the sack of flour down with deliberate care. Man in town. Asking questions about a woman. Hurt, traveling alone. Offered money to anyone who might have seen her. Clara's stomach dropped. The room tilted. Jeremiah. Thomas didn't answer right away. He moved to the window, scanning the woods with that sharp soldier's stillness. Matches the description you gave. Name wasn't spoken, but it's him. No mistaking it. Clara's hands trembled on the book she held. "How much money?" Thomas turned, brow furrowed. "Does it matter?" "It might," Clara whispered. "Jeremiah's got a silver tongue when he wants. Most folks in Cedar Falls don't have 2 coins to rub together. If he's offering enough..." Her voice cracked. "Someone will talk." Thomas's mouth pressed thin, but he nodded. "Ben." Morrison at the general store looked too interested. Asked twice whether I'd taken in company recently. Kept circling back like he was trying to put the pieces together. That night, Clara couldn't eat. The stew turned to ash in her mouth. She sat by the fire with her arms folded tight, fighting the familiar spiral of dread. Jeremiah wasn't just a memory now. He was a storm building on the horizon, ready to break. "You should let me go," she said finally, staring into the flames. Thomas looked up from where he was oiling his rifle. "What?" If I stay, he'll find me. And when he does, he'll bring trouble. This is your home, your land. I won't let you lose it because of me. Thomas set the rifle aside, his movements deliberate. This is my home, Clara, and I don't run from bullies, especially not the kind that raise their hand to women. She shook her head, tears threatening. You don't understand. He won't come alone. He never fights fair. He'll bring men with him, men who'll do whatever he pays them to. Thomas's gaze held steady, calm as stone. Then we'll be ready. The days that followed stretched taut with waiting. Clara practiced with Thomas's spare pistol, her hands shaking, the first time she held it. Jeremiah had taught her to shoot once, years ago, when he still pretended to be the brother she remembered. But that memory twisted sour in her stomach. Don't think about it being a man, Thomas said, voice steady as he corrected her grip. Think about it being the thing that stands between you and staying alive. She nodded, jaw clenched. She fired at knots in the woodpile, at tin cans lined along the fence. Her aim was shaky, but Thomas didn't mock, didn't scold. Just corrected, encouraged, reminded her to breathe. Each shot felt like a declaration. I will not go back. At night, she lay awake listening to the wind sift through the pines, every creak of the cabin timbers a phantom footstep, every distant cry of a coyote, Jeremiah's voice calling her name. One evening, Thomas caught her by the window, staring into the dark. He's not here yet, he said gently, but he's coming. Yes, Thomas admitted. He didn't lie, didn't sugarcoat. He's coming, and when he does, we'll meet him on our terms, not his. Something in the firmness of his tone soothed her, but fear still gnawed at the edges. It was on a crisp November morning, the air sharp with frost, that the certainty came. Thomas returned from checking his snares, his face gone hard as winter stone. He dropped 2 rabbits on the table without ceremony. Someone's been asking questions at the livery now, he said. Not just about a woman, about me, about whether I've got company up here in the woods. Clara's breath hitched, her hands clenched in her skirts. That means, Thomas nodded, means Jeremiah's got a lead, means we've got maybe a day, 2 at most. The fragile peace they had built, the books, the firelight, the laughter that had begun to edge into her days, felt suddenly fragile as spun glass. One breath, one misstep, and it would all shatter. Clara looked around the cabin that had begun to feel like home. Her throat closed. I won't let him destroy this, she whispered. Thomas met her gaze, steady and fierce. He won't. But, even as he spoke, the sound of wind through the trees felt heavier, darker, as if the land itself knew a reckoning was on its way. The night broke with the sound of horses. Clara had dozed in the chair by the fire, pistol resting on her lap, when the first distant thunder of hooves jolted her awake. The sound grew clearer with each heartbeat. 3, maybe 4 horses, moving slow through the trees, trying to be quiet, but not quiet enough. Her pulse raced, a drumbeat in her broken ribs. She looked across the cabin. Thomas was already at the window, rifle in hand, his body still as a hunting cat. How many? She whispered. 3. No, 4. Coming from the north. His voice was low, measured. He's here. The words settled like cold iron in Clara's chest. A shout split the night, raw and familiar. Jeremiah. Clara. His voice carried, sharp across the clearing. I know you're in there. Come out now and we can settle this peaceful-like. Clara's fingers tightened on the pistol. Her body shook, not just with fear but with something harder, anger. Thomas's eyes flicked toward her, steady, questioning. The choice was hers. She shook her head. There's no peace with him. Thomas nodded once. Then we hold here. Jeremiah's voice circled the cabin, weaving through the trees. You got no right to keep her. She's family. She belongs with me. She belongs to herself, Thomas called back, his voice carrying firm and even. And she's chosen to stay. The silence that followed was thick, dangerous. Clara could picture Jeremiah's face twisted with rage, unable to stomach defiance. "You don't know what she is," he spat. "That girl's sick in the head, lies spilling from her mouth since she could talk. I'm trying to save you from making a mistake." The lies struck like lashes, familiar and cruel. For years they had been Clara's reality, but now Thomas's voice cut through the poison like a blade. "The only mistake I see," he called, "is you not turning around and riding away." Jeremiah's laugh was ugly, harsh. "You think you can play hero, take in strays and come out of it clean. That girl's nothing but trouble. Soon as she gets what she wants, she'll leave you with nothing but heartache." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe. Not true. Not anymore. Thomas's voice, low and meant only for her, steadied her. "You know who you are. Don't let him take that from you." She opened her eyes, met his gaze across the dim cabin, and felt something shift. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Jeremiah," she shouted through the shattered window. Her voice rang strong in the night air. "I'm done running. Done. Hiding! Done letting you decide my life!" For a heartbeat, the clearing held still. Then Jeremiah roared, words cracking with rage. "You ungrateful witch! I kept you fed, kept you safe, and this is how you repay me?" "You kept me prisoner!" Clara's voice rose to meet his, years of silence breaking at once. "You beat me down, made me beg for scraps, made me think I was nothing, but I'm not yours, not anymore." The silence that followed was like the moment before a lightning strike. Then came the gunfire. The first volley shattered glass and wood. Bullets whistled through the cabin walls, thudding into logs. Clara ducked beneath the window, heart pounding, pistol clutched tight. Thomas's rifle cracked, the sound deafening in the small room. A cry split the night, followed by cursing and scrambling boots. "They're flanking!" Thomas barked, eyes sharp as he reloaded. Clara moved to the back window, pistol ready. Shadows flitted at the tree line, men trying to circle wide. She aimed, breath steady, squeezed. The pistol kicked, smoke curling from the barrel. A figure staggered, cursed, and fell back. Clara's arms trembled, but her grip held firm. Her ribs screamed with each breath, but something deeper surged stronger. "I will not be afraid." The firefight raged minutes that felt like hours. Wood splintered, smoke thickened, gunfire cracked sharp in the night. Clara fired again, her aim growing steadier, each shot a defiance against years of silence. When the gunfire eased, the clearing fell into eerie quiet. Only the groan of wind through the pines and the ragged breath of the wounded remained. "Stay down," Thomas warned, reloading, eyes never leaving the shadows. "This isn't over." Then Jeremiah's voice came again, colder, closer. "You think you're safe with him, Clara? You think he loves you? No man could love something as broken as you." The words cut deep, the old poison seeping fast. For a moment, her hands faltered. But then she thought of the books Thomas had opened for her, the meals shared by firelight, the way he had never once raised his hand or voice in cruelty. Maybe she was broken, but she was still breathing, still standing, still worth love. Clara rose to the window, made herself visible in the firelight. "You broke my ribs," she called, her voice strong and clear. "But you didn't break me." The words rang out, across the clearing, final and unshakable. For the first time in her life, Clara Hartwell stood unafraid. The clearing held its breath before the storm broke again. Thomas crouched by the door, rifle steady, his eyes fixed on the tree line. Clara pressed her back against the logs, pistol trembling in her hands, ears still ringing from the last volley. Then came Jeremiah's voice, closer now, sharp as a whip crack. "You think you can steal what's mine, stranger?" His boots crunched over frosted leaves. She's blood. She belongs to me. Thomas's reply cut cold through the night. She's not yours to own. Never was. The silence that followed stretched taut, every second heavy with menace. Clara's. Chest burned with each shallow breath, her ribs a cage barely holding her together. But beneath the pain, a fire stirred hotter than fear. The shadows moved. Jeremiah stepped into the clearing at last, moonlight silvering the hate etched into his face. Behind him, 2 men lingered, rifles half raised, eyes darting like dogs waiting for a signal. "Come out, Clara," Jeremiah called. "You've had your fun, but it ends tonight." Clara stood slowly, legs shaking, but she did not hide. Her voice carried steady across the clearing. "I'm not yours, Jeremiah. I never was, and I'll never go back." Jeremiah's face twisted, rage mixing with disbelief. "You think you're better than me? You'd be bones in a ditch if not. For me. Every scrap you ever had came from my hand." Clara raised the pistol, her arms trembling, but her voice strong. "The only thing you ever gave me was pain, and I'm done carrying it." Gunfire split the night. One of Jeremiah's men fired first, muzzle flash blooming bright. Thomas's rifle answered, sharp and deadly. The man dropped with a cry, clutching his leg. The second hesitated, nerves fraying, and bolted into the trees, the sound of retreat fading into the dark. That left Jeremiah, face white with fury, pistol drawn, eyes locked on Clara. "You'd turn on your own blood?" His voice cracked, raw with something almost like grief. "After everything I sacrificed for you?" "You didn't sacrifice," Clara shot back. "You destroyed. You beat me down, told me I was nothing, and called it love. But I know the truth now. Love doesn't break. It mends." Her words struck harder than bullets. Jeremiah snarled, raised his pistol, aiming at her, not Thomas, the same old cruelty driving him. Time slowed. Clara's breath caught. The trigger gleamed in the moonlight. Thomas's voice was a growl. "Don't," the crack of rifles answered. Jeremiah fired, the shot whistling past Clara's shoulder, splintering the wall. Thomas's rifle boomed an instant later, the force of it knocking Jeremiah backward. The clearing went still. Jeremiah staggered, pistol dropping from his hand. He clutched his shoulder, blood soaking his shirt, his face twisted in shock more than pain. Clara's chest heaved, pistol still raised though her arms trembled so violently she thought they might give way. Jeremiah's eyes found hers, wild and desperate. "Finish it then," he spat. "You'll never be free of me otherwise." The temptation cut deep. Years of terror, humiliation, broken bones, and whispered lies begging for vengeance. For a heartbeat, Clara saw herself pulling the trigger, ending it here, burying every memory with his body in the dirt. But another voice spoke louder. Thomas's words. "You belong to yourself." Clara lowered the pistol. Her hand shook, but her voice was steady. "No, I won't become what you are. I won't let you turn me cruel." Thomas stepped forward, rifle still in hand but lowered now. He crouched beside Jeremiah, binding the wound with quick, practiced hands. "You'll live," he said flatly. "Not because you deserve it, because she's stronger than you." Jeremiah glared up at Clara, eyes burning with hate, with something hollow underneath. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "Both of you." Clara shook her head. "No, Jeremiah. The only thing I regret is wasting so many years believing your lies." Her ribs screamed as she straightened, but her spirit soared. For the first time she felt no chain, no shadow at her back. She was free. By dawn, Jeremiah was gone, sent away with his wound bound and his pride shattered, swaying in his saddle as he vanished down the road. The clearing lay quiet again, smoke curling from the cabin chimney, blood staining the frosted grass. Clara stood on the porch beside Thomas, the pistol heavy at her side, her body broken but her heart beating fierce and new. "He'll come back," Thomas said, voice low. Clara met his gaze, steady as stone. No, he's done with me, and I'm done with him. Inside, the fire crackled warm, chasing away the chill. Clara sank into the chair, her whole body trembling now that the storm had passed. My ribs are already broken, she whispered to herself, the words no longer despair, but defiance. Then she lifted her eyes to Thomas, who was watching her with quiet pride, and added, "But my spirit isn't." Spring came early that year. The mountain snows melted into rushing streams, and the meadows turned green weeks before their time. Wildflowers speckled the hillsides, small bursts of color against the rugged land. Clara stood on the porch of the cabin, the boards newly mended, the glass panes replaced, and marveled at how the world looked different when you weren't afraid to lift your head and see it. 6 months had passed since Jeremiah had ridden into the dark, bleeding and defeated. 6 months since the night Clara had chosen not vengeance, but mercy. And in those months, she had learned to count time in seasons instead of bruises. Thomas worked in the garden they had expanded together, sleeves rolled up, hands in the earth. He straightened when he saw her watching and smiled, an easy smile now, unguarded in a way she'd rarely seen before. "Tomatoes are coming along good," he said, wiping soil on his trousers. "Ought to be enough for preserving come summer." "Clara," returned his smile, the warmth of it settling deep in her chest. Once, the idea of a shared harvest, of planning for future months would have felt like tempting fate. But now it felt like breathing. "I was thinking," she said, smoothing her skirt. "Maybe we could plant flowers along the path, make it welcoming for visitors." Thomas tilted his head. "Expecting company?" "Maybe," she said softly. "I've been thinking about writing to the school board in Cedar Falls, about the teaching position that came open." The words hung in the air heavier than their weight. A future spoken aloud. Thomas set down his hoe, walked to her side, and leaned on the porch rail. "You want to be a teacher?" "I want to help children learn to read the way you helped me," Clara said, her throat tight with the enormity of it. "Books showed me I wasn't trapped. I want to give that gift to others, to show them they have choices." Thomas's eyes softened, pride glinting in their depths. "That's good work, important work." She leaned closer, the scent of earth and pine between them. "It comes with a small house in town, big enough for a family if—" Her voice faltered. Thomas caught the pause, turned fully toward her. "If what?" Clara took a breath, heart pounding. "If a certain former soldier wouldn't mind sharing it with a woman who burns biscuits more often than not." For a heartbeat, silence. Then his dark eyes warmed, and he reached for her hand. "Are you asking me to marry you, Clara Hartwell?" The name she had chosen for herself rang proud and whole in her ears. "I suppose I am." Thomas's answer was a kiss, gentle and sure, tasting of soil and spring air and new beginnings. They spoke of summer plans, marrying when the wildflowers bloomed, keeping the cabin as their retreat, and a life in town filled with books and children's laughter. For the first time in years, Clara let herself imagine tomorrow without fear of it being torn away. "What about children of our own?" Thomas asked, eyes bright with something tender. Clara's chest tightened with both terror and hope. Once, she'd never have dared think herself fit to mother anyone. Now, with Thomas's steady presence at her side, the idea felt less like a dream and more like a promise. "Yes," she whispered. "I'd like that." That evening, as dusk painted the pines gold and purple, Clara sorted Thomas's books, her books now too. Her fingers lingered on Whitman's Song of the Open Road. She opened it and read aloud. "Henceforth I ask not good fortune. I myself am good fortune. Henceforth I whimper no more, postpone no more, need nothing." Thomas looked up from the hearth, smiling. "That's your poem, your truth." Clara closed the book, pressing it to her chest. I used to think my broken ribs were the most important thing about me, the thing that defined everything else. But now, her eyes lifted, steady. Now I know it was just something I survived, not who I am. Thomas's hand came to rest on hers. Exactly, he said. Later, Clara caught her reflection in the mirror by the door. The woman who looked back at her was not the beaten girl who once whispered her surrender to the cabin walls. This woman's eyes were clear, her shoulders straight, her hand steady. I hardly recognize myself, she murmured. Thomas came up behind her, hands warm on her shoulders. You look like the woman you were always meant to be. Tears pricked her eyes, not from sorrow, but from gratitude. As night fell, they sat by the fire. Clara read aloud from a new book ordered from town, her voice sure over words that once would have baffled her. Thomas listened, mending tack with quiet contentment. My ribs are already broken, she whispered once more, setting the book aside. The words held no despair now, no surrender, only memory. But my heart is whole. Thomas reached for her hand, clasping it firm, his voice low and certain. Let it grow stronger. Clara smiled, her eyes fixed on the firelight, on the man beside her, on the world that had opened like a road ahead. For the first time, she believed in tomorrows. If Clara's fight for freedom and love stirred something in you, don't ride off just yet. Hit that like button, share this tale with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to join us for more frontier stories of grit, redemption, and hearts mended strong.